Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is, wherever you are. It is Friday, the 20th of June. Yes, you read me or heard me right. It is finally Friday. How it's quite the 20th of June, I have no fucking idea because I don't know where the year's gone. But you join me with the amazing guys at AlphaPicks. If you don't already follow them and subscribe to their Substacks, etc., do so. You're missing out if you don't. Where we will be reviewing the major stories of the week and a bit of value. Hopefully the week generates a bit of alpha from putting the alpha in AlphaPicks. Hope we put a smile on your face, etc. Lads, how you doing?
Juicy.
Juicy.
I'm a little bit.
I'm good,
I'm
thank
a
you.
little bit rough, actually, Ryan. I mean, I sound
Oh,
a bit similar to you, actually.
well, I'm
But
not rough, so thanks for that. That's just my voice. Thanks.
just your deep dulcet tones.
That's it.
Um, but yeah, no good. Should we start off with some weather chat before we get down to the serious stuff? Because
It's fucking hot.
it's so hot, isn't it?
That's the weather with Ryan. Today,
Yeah.
it's fucking hot.
So the caution we give to our listeners is stay cool, drink cold beer,
Yeah.
and basically make sure you wear some suntan cream.
Yeah, exactly that. I recommend cider. Although
Yeah.
I'm not made for I'm not one for cider is born for ice. It should be room temperature or cloudy if you ask me, being a Somerset boy. And speaking of cider, I see Tom Talks Cars is on the show and he's known for his love of mango cider. But before we go down that rabbit hole, what has been happening this week?
Let's talk about the big stories of the week. I mean, there's lots actually to talk about, considering as well that yesterday was obviously a holiday in the States. So technically it was a 4-day sort of trading week for most people. And actually to that end, mutual friend of all of ours, Lord Fed, actually posted a very good comment yesterday where it's like, if you were basically trading US futures, yesterday, then that's not trading, that's addiction. And I
Yeah,
do think that's a
absolutely.
good point, that when you have the public holidays, as you know, in the UK, well, we've passed by most of ours, unfortunately, in May. But it is a very good point to remember that when you've got thin liquidity in, markets where it's closed, trading on the futures, I think, is one of those pointless things to do.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you know what?
so yeah.
I make you and our friend Lord Fed completely right. It's one of those that, don't get me wrong. I understand that some people have to have the markets open, and I do understand that some people, potentially have to trade. But if you don't and you're jobbing, don't job on holidays. It's just,
Mm.
the odds are stacked against you at the best of times. To try and job markets or day trade markets when there's reduced liquidity, all this, that, and the other. It's just, it's a road to ruin. I get the need for it. I've 20 years in front of a desk. You're always thinking, shit, well, if no one else is there and something happens, I've got a bigger chance to make more money. That will always be there. But trust me, I reckon if I added up all my P&Ls from all like the public holidays over the years, I'd be shocked if I'm up. I'd be shocked if I'm
Yeah.
down. To be honest, I'd be shocked if I'm down small.
Yeah.
That's the way.
Yeah.
Because it's always one of those with the lack of liquidity. I'll just add a few more. I'll just add a few more
Yeah.
lots. I'll add a few more. Next minute, you're having your worst day of the year,
And
and
everyone
there's
else is
not.
just out enjoying
Yeah,
themselves as well. That's
this
the
is
other thing, isn't
it.
it?
There's not even anyone else in the office to go for a beer
Yeah.
with.
Yeah. But having said that, across yesterday here, obviously more in Europe, let's say, there was actually action for those not stateside, particularly the two. I mean, we'll come on to the Fed on Wednesday next, but the two big central banks, obviously the Swiss National Bank, who
Yeah.
cut their rates down to zero, and obviously the Bank of England over here, who what I think can be described as a dovish hold, that
Yes.
they pulled out the bag. But so firstly, Switzerland, which I think is a really interesting one because you actually saw the Swiss franc rally after the National Bank cut rates by 25 basis points. And part of this obviously is that there was, I think it was about 33 basis points of cuts priced in. So in actual fact, 25 was somewhat underwhelming versus
Yeah.
what was priced. But the other thing that it speaks to more broadly is that the National Bank can't stem the appreciating franc, which has obviously been on a tear so far this year, and cutting interest rates even down to zero, is not going to stop this trend. And I think that's a really interesting point, because even though, their inflation expectations, inflation should drop, like I think it's 0.3%, their end of year forecast,
Right.
and 0.1% for next year. So inflation is basically non-existent in Switzerland, and their growth is slowing as well. So easing monetary policy makes complete sense. However, what you've got at a global level is they're looking past these domestic concerns and basically wanting to hold francs as their safe haven against
Yeah.
everything else that's going on in the world. So really, when you actually weigh up, them cutting rates, aggressively, it's kind of one where it's like, even if they go negative, I think they will later this year. I honestly don't think rates is a tool to stop the stronger franc. And I mean, I'm happily will put a beer on this either way by year end. But if either of you think that franc is going to start to weaken, but I just don't see
No,
it.
I think you're right, and I think it's always been one of those things, isn't it? Is because it's got that safe haven status. Um, it's probably the movements in the Swiss franc. That's, I think, especially catch out a lot of newer traders, because they'll see, like, they'll watch policy decisions and say, well, well, on the book it should be doing this. It's like, book smart and all that in terms of real world. I think people often fail to factor in the safe haven demand of the Swiss franc, especially when you've got times like this. There's
Mm,
different. I think there's different flavors of safe haven, right? When you're talking about, I'm not saying I'm not saying we're anywhere near World War III, because I don't believe we are, but you know when you've got things like what's going on in Russia and Ukraine, and and the Russians having to move money out and like hide it in Switzerland, all this stuff. And when you got
mm.
it all kicking off in the Middle East, potentially China, Taiwan. We've also, it wasn't that long ago that we had in India and
India,
Pakistan.
Pakistan, yeah.
These are all the kind of the geopolitical events that really do lend themselves to be buying Swissy. Because
Mm,
jokes aside, they are the neutral country for a reason. They're going to be they're going to be the last country that ever gets into trouble in terms of like war or anything like that.
mm.
It's it's but it's hard to say it, because when you say it like this, people go, "Oh, Ryan thinks that there's going to be World War III and everyone's going to be bombed apart from Switzerland." I don't mean that at all. But what I mean is there's significant demand for people that want to hedge against any potential. And we're talking like billions and billions and billions flooding in. Um,
Mm,
so yeah, it's an interesting one to keep an eye on. But obviously that does mean that it can unwind quite quickly.
mm.
But no,
It
one
was on my
definitely one to keep.
bingo card, World War Three for today, so thank you. I've checked
There
that
you
off.
go. House.
Easy. Yeah, and the other interesting point, which is well worth remembering, is that in the past, Swiss have been quite active in basically what you could say manipulating their currency, or certainly stemming the tide from that way.
Well,
Um,
I think this is the thing, that they definitely do manipulate their currency, but
yeah,
they're just very, very good in how they word it.
they're very Swiss. They're very Swiss about. They're
Yes,
discreet.
exactly
They're
that.
very Swiss. Yeah,
Like here, look. Yeah, we might manipulate our currency, but here's a Toblerone. Can you just look the other
yeah,
way,
yeah,
please?
yeah. Exactly. Here's a Toblerone and a Rolex. Can you just leave us
Yeah.
alone for a little bit?
Right. So
Yeah.
sorry to digress, but I'm not sure if you're aware of this, and maybe our listeners are. Fun fact about Rolex: technically, they're labelled as a foundation or a charitable foundation in Switzerland. The company is, and the reason
Mm,
for this is every year, on paper, and I stress on paper, and I'm doing air quotes, um, they give an undisclosed number of scholarships to students for top universities and stuff like that. However, and because of this, they pay zero tax, as in completely zero tax. However, part of
mm,
Swiss law means that they never have to declare the number or who they've given scholarships to. Now,
mm.
I just floated that out there to say, I would love to
Mm.
see an audit on this.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I did not know that.
There you go.
That's a very interesting stat. Um, we might have to rehouse AlphaPicks and PiQ's entities out of
Oh
Switzerland.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly
yeah.
that.
But anyway, so back to the point. Yes, so the point is that given the Swiss want a trade deal with the US at the moment, because interestingly, they had the highest reciprocal tariff rate out of the G10 back in April when Trump did his first Liberation Day thing at 31%. So they basically want to get a trade deal done. They don't want to risk poking the bear and getting labelled by the US as a currency manipulator, because that's something Trump would be all over that, certainly vocally at least anyway. So I don't think they can be as either actively or discreetly trying to weaken the Swiss franc at the moment. So all of that I think points to weaker franc. Bank of England, and slightly more generally, the outlook for the UK economy, because you had payrolls earlier this week, which was a disaster for May. And earlier today, we had retail sales, which was the sharpest drop since 2023. So you've basically got more data points. Remember, we were talking about the GDP print last week,
Yes.
weren't we? About April's GDP print, which was a mess, minus 0.3%. We've now we've had retail sales today and other data points that are backing up the UK economy is struggling. And to compound that, we have the Bank of England, who are kind of starting to acknowledge that things aren't that great. And obviously rates market is pricing in more cuts. So the question I have at the moment, there's basically 1.9 cuts price through to the end of the year. We've obviously got the July meeting, skips August, and then it's September, skips October, November, December. So 4 meetings left of the year. So my question to you
Is there no August BOE meeting?
the 7th. Oh, sorry, I read that the wrong way around. It's the 7th to the 8th.
Oh,
Oh, it's
do you know
American, isn't
what?
it?
Do you know what? Hats off to Michael Brown, because I only remember this because Michael Brown mentioned it this morning, and he mentioned August.
Yes, that's very good. Yes, it's the 8th, 7th. So yes, August the 7th.
Bloody
Correct. Sorry.
US and their bloody mixed up
I get it
bloody
every
dates.
time.
Bloody hell.
Bloomberg. So August, September, November, December. So four meetings left of the year, roughly 2 cuts priced. Do you think that's fair pricing? If not, what are you thinking?
Jay, do you want to go first? Now you're back.
Can I just ask which bank is this referring to?
Bank of England.
This Bank of England.
Or Bank of Fred Needle Street.
Well, I wasn't sure if we go on to the Fed. 2 cuts for the end of this year, higher, lower. I would say let's go lower.
I actually think 2 is I think that's fair. I think 2 is about right. And as Michael Brown said this morning, I think we'll definitely see a cut in August. To be honest, obviously yesterday, I think the vote, I think I know for a fact, the expectation on the vote was 7-2, and I actually said yesterday morning that I'd bet the farm on it being a 6-3 in favour of a cut, and I got proved right, which was nice. I do think that the Bank of England the MPC rather than the bank as a whole. I do believe the MPC are pretty much itching at this point to cut rates, because we look at the data at the UK is getting worse, and we're talking about data that's not entirely impacted by tariffs either. I think it's unfortunately when Reeves did make these changes to national insurance and stuff like this, we did see it on it was written on the walls what was going to be happening, and unfortunately it seems to be coming true to truth. And I do think that Bank of England are very aware of this, and when Labour did take control of the government, we did kind of, there's, even I was kind of quite surprised by saying, well, look, do you know what? On paper, they seem to be the most fiscally educated or fiscally sound Labour government we've had in a long time. Unfortunately, that went out the window pretty sharpish, and I think the Bank of England are taking one look at this and saying, look, we can't really trust the Labour government to be, pulling the right strings fiscally. So monetary policy is going to be needed, and I think that's only going to be backed up when we look around to the other G7 banks that are minus Japan, but they're always the outlier. And I think we're seeing that across the curve. I think the Norges Bank was the last of the hawks really out of the traditional central banks. It's an interesting one, and I do think 2's probably spot on. If things do start going worse, I think there's a chance we'll get a 3. But do you know what? And I'm going to say this. I don't think this is likely, but I think it's just worth mentioning. I wouldn't be completely surprised if the data continues to deteriorate on the trajectory it is already, if it keeps that trajectory and we're slightly worse off in August, don't be surprised if we start pricing in a 50 cut in August. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I think we'll start seeing pricing for that, and we'll start seeing some hedging going through in the short sterling, etc., for that eventuality.
That's an interesting one. Yeah.
Yeah.
You could go 2 cuts, or even you see like the 25 bips in August, but then like the second cut, November, December, you see is basically as 150 basis point one.
Well, depending on the date week. Obviously, there's a lot of time between now and August, but potentially, why we could see the Bank of England decide to front load it and go 50 in August.
Yeah, I mean, it's a
What
smart thing to do, isn't it? I mean, whether they've got
I,
the
I'm against cutting rates unless you really, really have to. I think, a central bank's position is, normality isn't, sub 2% rates or, zero rates. Normality should be like 5 to 7% rates. But obviously none of us are old enough to remember times like that. But that's genuinely what the rate should be in like in a thriving economy. But yeah, no, I'd be interested to see what their angle is. But I don't think there's anything against front loading rate cuts. And also I'm not saying this is going to happen, but there has been talk over the years of why are we only doing it in 25 basis point increments? Why don't we do 12.5 increments? So maybe we see a 37.5 cut. Now I would love to see that, just because people will lose their fucking minds on Twitter. But anyway, that's just me.
And also, the one thing I would say is that you're not in consideration to be the next Fed chair with that type of
Absolutely.
attitude.
Well, MPC chair.
Absolutely
No.
not. Yeah.
The governor. No,
Any chair of the central bank that the politicians are aggressively trying to indirectly push to lower rates.
Yeah, I'm not at the front.
Not at the front. And capping out our central bank bonanza, the Fed on Wednesday night, which obviously was slightly more muted, but given that the following day, obviously markets were closed. But even if they were open, and from certainly some action in the futures markets, like it wasn't really that much of a big deal. I would say summing up the press conference was that it was very kind of like full of hedges. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, tariffs will, potentially they're starting to distort the outlook. They're well positioned to wait. And I think you see that obviously in the dot plots, which everyone's harped on about for a lot of time, so I don't think we'll chat about more. But the bottom line is that the Fed's very much in a reactive mode. And I think whilst they're in that reactive mode, we're going to have to see something materially, i.e. you're going to have to see some really bad data, like I see here in the UK. If you start to see US data really start to fall off a cliff, then I think they do become more reactive, and you do see a slightly swifter pace of cuts this year or into early next year. But failing that, if everything just sort of ticks along, I think the Fed are basically reactive, and we shouldn't really get or price in a particularly aggressive half next year.
I can't remember who it was, but I did see someone on Twitter kind of do in their opinion, what like Powell's TLDR was, like our cut when you cut tariffs. And I did think, you know what? That's probably not a bad way of framing it, and it's probably not too far from the truth. Or at least he'll look to cut once he has clarity that the plates have stopped spinning. Because at the moment there's so many variables. There's so many things on the table that are getting moved around constantly by the Trump administration. You can't really expect something. Monetary policy isn't a fast move. It's not a speedboat. It's an oil tanker, right? You can't be chopping and changing all the time. So to expect Powell and the FOMC to be able to make committed decisions like this when they have no idea what's going to be happening next week, let alone in 2 months' time, I think it's a hard ask to expect people to be able to do that. I make them right. I know wait and see. There's a lot of people who say, "Oh, that's the pussy approach," but unfortunately, when you're dealing with stuff like this, you have to be cautious. If central banks were too reactive, they would get it in the ear regardless, right? So,
Mm.
you can't, but I've got a lot of time for central bankers. I know it goes against, I know it's an unpopular opinion, but I do think people give them a hard time needlessly, because I certainly want the job. Well, I say that.
Well, you're not going to lower rates, so get out of here. Pushing us to austerity 3.0
Whoa,
under
whoa,
the new
whoa.
governor. Whoa, whoa. Yeah. Let's drop central banks now, cover them extensively. A few other interesting little snippets around the newsroom this week, for the last few minutes. One I thought was interesting was stable coins, where on Tuesday the Senate passed the Genius Act, which essentially the gist of it is that companies can issue dollar-backed stable coins. Now it still needs to go through the House, still needs to get presidential approval, yada yada yada, but it is a big step. And even after that, you've seen the likes of like Amazon, Walmart, coming out and essentially looking for like joint ventures, or their own plans in terms of launching stable coins. So I think, it's starting to gather pace, and I definitely think this is one where I can't see why it won't get through the other approvals. And yeah, I mean, can you imagine like having a Walmart stable coin, and you go to
Well,
Walmart and use that, and Amazon, and I mean,
Well,
it's
this is it.
endless.
It's what like me and Cam have spoken about a few times on the crypto blast we do. It's just removing those barriers to entry, right? Um,
Mm,
and you'll get people using it without really knowing they're using it.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
I know I keep using the QR code as a good analogy, but I truly think it's a great analogy because everyone was shit scared of QR codes before COVID. Then we were forced to use. Well, I was forced to use them at the bar. Um, and now everyone uses them, and now it's like it's now second nature. And I think it's breaking down those barriers to entry, removing those friction points that get people to feel comfortable using stablecoins, which is part of the cryptocurrency ecosystem. And then it's not such a big leap to then use other cryptos for certain other tasks. But we still need to wait for coins with utility, obviously. But
Mm.
an interesting one actually. I can't remember. Forgive me. I can't remember if I read it in a Bloomberg article or someone posted it. Or it might have even been a research note from one of the banks. But they made the good point that a lot of these a lot of these stable coins are backed by treasuries and stuff like that. Well, officially they're backed by treasuries and etc. And the way the stablecoin market is growing so quickly, this is now another major buyer of T-bills and T-notes and T-bonds that's entering the
Mm.
market. So I think that's something we need to keep an eye on because even the stablecoin market is still tiny when you consider everything else that's out there. So I think it's definitely one to kind of keep an eye on because it is, it could be a significant, person that's entered the chat in terms of the treasury auction. But you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
something that we need to keep an eye on.
Yeah. No, agreed. Um, and then another story that made me, I don't know whether to laugh or cry at this. So obviously Meta and Mr. Zuckerberg are building out a super intelligent AI team, which I think we spoke about last week, as well. Now, he's been on the hunt for more people this
Oh,
week.
I know where this is
And you
going.
know where he's going. And
Yeah. Oh
so
my God.
OpenAI Sam Altman, whose brother has a podcast. I did not know Sam Altman's brother has a podcast, but anyway, Sam went on his brother's podcast, was chatting about this, and he basically said that Zuckerberg has offered some of his guys signing bonuses as high as
That's
$100 million,
incredible.
and annual compensation packages exceeding that, to join his new super team. And then just before I get your comments on that, overnight there was another one of a company called Safe Superintelligence, that was basically co-founded by another OpenAI guy, Ilya, and Zuckerberg tried to buy the company for like 30 billion early this year, was basically told to get lost. And so he's poached their CEO, Daniel Gross, for an undisclosed sum. But I mean, we can
It's not going to be
figure
30
out
billion.
it's not going to be 30 billion. And so, yeah, so basically he tried to buy the company. They said, no, thanks, see you later. He's gone now and just snapped their CEO up.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing about this, and the thing that made me chuckle, is Sam was giving it the bigger team, that the other, and buy people. And then you're like, hang on, mate, you literally just bought, what's his name, Ivy, the iPhone designer, to make your kind of the physical AI stuff. You literally did exactly what you're saying
Mm,
doesn't work. But the thing is, it's quite an exciting time because, Meta, Google, Apple are now, Apple are working behind the scenes, as we spoke about last week. They're just not, they're not pushing every iteration in everyone's faces. There's a lot of money now, and a lot of serious people, rather than not people just in their garages putting AI together, like Pony AI or whatever it is out in China, which is my favorite name for any AI. But I think it's good that we're getting all this mass competition, because it will keep everyone honest, and it'll, I'm not a big fan of Sam Altman at the best of times, but I like it's nice watching him squirm.
Yeah, he's that type of guy that sort of sat in the back of the maths class, didn't he? And it was just kind of like, that kind of guy who always like got the right answers.
Well, to be honest, I was in a very low form in maths, so I was probably sat at the back throwing stuff or picking my nose. So no, I have no idea what you're on about.
Yeah. Yeah, and also I think it just shows. It shows the seriousness they're taking it, given
Oh
the
yeah,
amount of money they're throwing. Because, this isn't a small. Say this is a 10, 20 person team, like the men are building out. That annual comp package is like, for the team, insane amounts.
insane.
So clearly they're
Well,
only. Don't get me wrong. If they underperform, they'll be out. But clearly, if you're going to be spending in the billions,
yeah.
like
We were only
you believe
saying
there's more there.
a little while ago that maybe we're seeing like a drop off in the spend, and it's going to be spent on but the spend is going to be
Yeah.
more quality than quantity in terms of dollar usage. And now all of a sudden we
Mm.
see this like, okay, no, we're back to spending. We're back to
Yeah.
throwing money at the wall.
And, this is a public service announcement. Mark, if you are listening to the Friday Fix, myself, Ryan and Jesse, our accounts are
Yeah,
open.
I can spell AI
And we are experienced in the AI
in
field.
the arena. In the arena,
In the arena.
I can
Yeah.
spell AI
Someone,
with crayons.
someone call us veterans of the space. But, hit us up and we can have a conversation.
Yeah, second
Um,
that.
yeah. So those, in light of time, we've actually running through. So those were pretty much the major stories I wanted to run through. Yes, unless anyone else wants to chirp in.
Jesse, you got anything? If you're still there, I know you've had some connection problems. Hello? Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah, there you go. Sorry, in and out of connection throughout. No, I probably won't circle back to the Fed, because you guys have already spoken about that. I don't want to bore anyone, so I will just leave it there. And yeah, hopefully my connection next week is
Perfect.
sorted out.
One thing I will say is obviously the Iran Israel situation. Again, there's a lot of the usual talking heads calling on, World War III, and the US is going to use tactical nuclear weapons. As always, give those people a wide berth, because 9 times out of 10 it's 99 times out of 100 is for the clicks. Don't believe the hype. Also everyone here, I think, hopes that calmer heads prevail, etc., etc. But just don't get sucked in, especially if oil trading and whatnot is not your bag and you've not done it before. Do not get sucked in calling for like $200 oil and stuff like that. It's an easy way to lose money if you're just floating around in a market that you have no experience in. So whatever you're doing, keep it tight, basically. But guys, thank you so much as always, absolute stars. Again, listeners, if you don't already follow and subscribe to the AlphaPicks team and their Substack, etc., do so. You're missing out on an incredible amount of value if you don't do that. Alex, Jesse, thank you as always. Listeners, thank you as always for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Much love.
Later. Thanks, Ryan.